So at 19, you said you were, in a new location, trying to make friends and whatnot. You started doing theater and whatnot. When did you start your, like, say, Green Witch path, or when did you start getting into herbalism and whatnot?
hmm Well, interestingly, I started getting into herbal medicine. Let's see, I was already deeply into like my spiritual path.
Mm.
And I was pretty young still when I started herbal medicine. I started looking for help with herbs when I was about, let's see, 20, I think. Yeah, I was about maybe 19, 20. It was when I came home from those world travels. I grew up on the East Coast. I moved out to Northern California to continue college. I had been to other colleges before my travels, and then came out west. And there I was in the mecca of Northern California and everything groovy, right? And so I went to my first herbalist, and that really is the thing that started me, even though what my experience with the herbs that I took and he gave was they were undrinkable, they tasted awful. Um, and yet, there was that little magic thing happening that led me to the next thing, which led me to the next thing, which led me. So, and it's been unfolding ever since. Yeah, ever since then. So,
Did you end
yeah,
up going to the California School of Herbal Studies?
I did not. I was at the University of California in Santa Cruz then.
Gotcha.
And then when I graduated, it was a degree in creative writing, actually, because really I am a writer who's also an herbalist. I'm not an herbalist who's writing books only because I want to get my herbal info out. Like the writing is just, if not as much my soul work, more my soul work. It's
Mhm.
it's really yeah, it's what I must do. And as far as being an herbalist, I must be with the plants and make my medicines and this and that. As far as teaching about them, it's well, who knows, right? It's been a beautiful path to date. But the writing is really the heart and soul central to me. And then I'm sorry, I got lost in my own thing. Asking
You're good.
me about teaching? No, what did you ask
Oh,
me?
just like when you kind of got into herbalism and that whole path.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So that's what I was going to say when I moved back from the West Coast, and I actually I think got the correspondence course from Michael Tierra, and I had a wonderful stint with Dr. John Moore, the hobo herbologist of Harlem. He was quite a character, and I remember I did my first 10 years of as an herbal teacher in downtown Manhattan. Right, that's where the nickname the Green Witch of New York came from. Right, that has stuck even though it's been decades. I've lived in Manhattan, but yeah, so I was an herbalist in and taking people into Central Park and Prospect Park and Inwood Park, and really even I did my very first weed walk around like a square city block from where I lived on 14th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. For those listening who know New York City, you'll know this is not like a plant laden part of the city. This is a very trafficked, commercial, no trees, or at least it was then, right? But I did one square loop and found, I don't know, 30 medicinal plants. At one point, I remember, speaking about confidence and stretching into yourself, honestly, I don't know when I would have ever taught my first medicine class if my best friend hadn't come. Lisa flew in from Los Angeles and literally wrote the flyers and addressed the envelopes with me and said, "You are doing this, you are sending it out." And that's how I came to teach my very first class in my apartment in Manhattan. And I always remember this, that it snowed. I was like, really? It snowed. I have a plant walk plan. And I remember taking a paper cup, like a coffee cup from the diner, and like going to the diner, getting the cup and digging out where I had seen chickweed, when I was scouting the walk days before. And there it was in full flower under the snow. And everybody was like, wow. So yeah, so fun, fun. And so yeah, I really did my first 10 years as an herbalist in the heart of the city.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Green Witch of Manhattan, so I'm glad you brought that up. And I also got to say, Lisa's a good friend. She helped you stretch outside of your comfort zone. I did want to ask you, I've never heard of this hobo herbalist of Harlem. Can you tell us more about that person?
Yeah, he was well known in his own, community, and he was a guy from the South, I believe, and he had a store that was famous back in the day called the Wisdom Tree, and I think it was in Georgia, but then he opened it, or he and others opened it, that I'm not sure, in Harlem, New York, and we're now talking about like in the 80s. It may have been open before that, but that's when I became aware, was in the mid 80s. So I've been doing this a little while now, Mason.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so Dr. John Moore, and I have even some of his, not books, but like big, thick booklets, and he kind of went all over and in terms of, everything from iridology to herbal to very spiritual. And yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And then it was Susan Weed who taught me that I could learn from the plants themselves. Right. So that is all of these, formative influences